It's a Thursday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. We're back just like we told you we would be. It's so good to say we. Damichael Cole back with me here on Locked On Grizzlies. Memphis Grizzlies basketball is back as well. We're going to talk all about that. But first, we've had some clamoring, Damichael. I don't know if you heard this or not in your time away from Locked On Grizzlies. Apparently, Ja Morant's getting traded this summer. We're going to talk about that and more coming up on this edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to this Thursday episode of Locked On Grizzlies. It is I, Joe Mullinax, one of your hosts, and it's always so good to be able to say one of your hosts because that means my wonderful co-host, Damichael Cole, Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee, is back with me. We are whole once again. The dynamic duo rides once more here on Locked On Grizzlies. I can't wait to hear about Damichael's trip and how he missed breaking the news of Ja Morant's impending dealing this summer. He should feel bad about his beat writer job. He needs to do it better. Hopefully you're sensing the sarcasm dripping off of every word that I speak. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing wherever you get podcasts, and also make sure that you are not just Apple, Spotify, Amazon, and YouTubing, but you are also going to LockedOnDaily.com and subscribing to our free daily newsletter. Again, LockedOnDaily.com to do that. Damichael, I hope you had a wonderful trip over the All-Star weekend. I have to admit, and it's very rare for me to say this, but I'm disappointed in you. I'm disappointed, and it hurts. It pains me to say that because how in the world, I care very deeply about you. I feel like if you're an everydayer of Locked On Grizzlies, you know that sometimes I say things that are almost too far, right? It's uncomfortable. Like, why does he actually say that about another person? But this was surprising to me. You missed the opportunity. Howard Beck, what up, Beck? He's been on Locked On Grizzlies in the past, a couple of times. An NBA executive, and we'll talk about the importance of being clear in reporting here in a moment. In fairness to Beck, it was not his fault. An NBA executive pegs Ja Morant as a star to keep an eye on as a potential trade candidate this summer. That's from Full Court Pass, one of many aggregation accounts on social media that picked up this story from Beck and ran with it. Now, we don't have time for you to do journalism 101 with us, partner. It's important to understand that keeping an eye on and Ja is going to get traded are two very different things. But I do think that since we've been away for a day or so, the response to this from Zach Kleiman is actually one that is more worth our time to focus on. Drew Hill of the Daily Memphian reached out to Grizzlies GM Zach Kleiman at @DrewHill_DM on X to see if he would comment about the recent speculation about Ja. Here's what he had to say, keyword being speculation. I can't blame other executives, and this is Kleiman, word for word quote, other executives, in air quotes, for fantasizing about us trading Ja, but it's just that fantasy. We are not trading Ja. Continue to underestimate Ja, this team, and the city, and we will let our performance on the floor speak for itself. I'm not going to give this nonsense further oxygen and look forward to getting back to basketball. Now, there's a lot for us to unpack here in about 7 minutes of a segment, but I do want to get your take because I don't know. I know you've been very busy, partner. Ironically, on our West Squad show this week, where I made my debut, thanks to everybody who gave nice comments out there about how I brought some Grizzlies energy, as Damichael did the week before, to the show. But we talked about this exact topic. And it was Matt Moore at HP Basketball, Locked On Nuggets, who talked about the idea of, can Memphis pay all three of these guys? And I said, if I had to choose, I would choose Ja because his value would be higher than that of Desmond Bane. I wanted to say over and over again that I would not trade any of them. And that is the side that Zach Kleiman has clearly drawn the line in the sand of, at least for now, and very publicly, and I think that's the most important part, very explicitly landed on the side of Ja Morant. You usually do not see general managers come down this clearly, Damichael, but Zach Kleiman has done just that in the case of Ja staying in Memphis. Rightfully so, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, and Zach Kleiman is someone who's often mild-mannered. He is, I've covered this team for a while and really gotten to, know him, a decent amount. And the beginning of that statement is not what gets me. It's the second half of it, Joe, that really brings out when he said, "Continue to underestimate Ja, this team, and this city, and we will let our performance on the floor speak for itself. I'm not going to give this nonsense further oxygen and look forward to getting back to basketball." You know what that sounds like to me? That sounds like a guy who's basically over this whole small market team that's going to trade his stars. He said it time and time again that the Grizzlies will not – the Grizzlies are building around this core. The Grizzlies are building around Ja Morant. The Grizzlies are building around Desmond Bane. The Grizzlies are building around Jaren Jackson Jr. That is the core. He has said it over and over again. And to me, this was a guy like, look, this is my last time addressing this. But, you mentioned it. You said it perfect. It was speculation. It was nothing I really didn't put too much into. But it's good to see Kleiman just come out and completely shut that down.
It certainly didn't stop Lakers bloggers, right? Like Anthony Irvin, I think is his name, who came out and said, "Oh yeah, maybe we should give the Mark Williams," or it might have been Harrison Fagan of SB Nation, who came out and said we should just give the Mark Williams package that didn't go through to Memphis for Ja Morant. That was elite trolling by Harrison, who I used to work with over at SB Nation. For me, Damichael, and I said as much on the squad show. If you haven't checked out those squad shows, make sure you go back after this episode, check those out. Damichael did a great job the week before as well for us. I think that the important thing to acknowledge, and we did talk about this, if the Memphis Grizzlies, who have drafted literally everybody, right? Ja Morant, Memphis Grizzlies draft pick. Jaren Jackson Jr., Memphis Grizzlies draft pick. Desmond Bane, Memphis Grizzlies draft pick. The biggest contributor on this team, who is not a direct draft pick of the Memphis Grizzlies, was Luke Kennard. I believe that's right. Or not signed by the Memphis Grizzlies, brought in via
the entire starting lineup is Grizzlies draft picks. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So if the CBA is structured in such a way, because that was Matt's bigger point, right? That everybody's terrified of that second apron. It's one of the reasons the Luka Doncic trade happened. I do think that the craziness of the Luka deal opens up a world of possibilities. It's like an evil version of A Whole New World from Aladdin, right? We're in this new space, a dazzling place that we never wanted to know, because we are seeing rumors, teams not going to be able to keep guys or not wanting to keep guys because they don't think they're going to be worth these major contracts down the road. I don't think that's the case in Memphis. And if you have a situation in Memphis and, Rylan, who hosts Locked On Thunder, the biggest example of this is Oklahoma City, right? Because the Memphis Grizzlies are basically the little brother of the Oklahoma City Thunder in terms of how these teams have been built, right?
Joe, watch it now.
Okay. See, what I mean by that is the Thunder have just done it better, right? Memphis had 2 or 3 guys across All-Star Weekend, 2 of them in the Rising Stars Challenge. The Thunder had 2 legitimate All-Stars, right? That are younger than Jaren in the case of Williams, right? So I think that the important thing to point out is if OKC can't afford to keep all these guys, and to a lesser extent, if Memphis can't afford to keep all these guys, you have to do something to tweak the CBA, because Memphis and the Oklahoma City Thunder are doing it the right way. Now, I made the point that the Grizzlies signed G.G. Jackson to a low-number multi-year deal. Vince Williams Jr., other names down the list. They're doing the things that they do with second-round picks. They see this coming. Zach Kleiman is not stupid, right? They understand that a day is going to come where money is going to get tight, and they're being as cost-effective as possible to keep as good of players around the big 3 as they can. But I don't think the Grizzlies are going to run away from the luxury tax. At least their words have not suggested that. But I do stand by, Damichael, and I know you don't agree fully, but I need to see it before I fully believe it. Memphis is the least valuable NBA franchise. CNBC did their valuations they do every year. Memphis is 30 out of 30. Robert Parra ain't hurting for cash, but at the same time, it's not like this is a business venture that's lining his pockets. Aside from if he sold the team, he has to pay that tax before I believe he'll do it. But I do think they're more likely to do it than they've ever been before.
Yeah, I mean, and they've never been in this situation, right? They've been in
Right.
a situation now where you're talking about giving out max contracts to 3 people. That's never been the Grizzlies. So it's not like they've been in this situation and they've cheaped their way out before, like the big brother that you keep referring to. OKC's been in this situation before. We saw how that played out. They end up trading a future MVP in that case. The Grizzlies haven't been in that situation before. You giving OKC some praise. I gotta knock them down a couple steps. Real quick here, but no, getting back to your point, I think you make an excellent point. This is not something we've seen the Grizzlies have to deal with. So with that being the case, I understand why you're hesitant on the idea. And even if you watch how they managed the trade deadline, some people had problems with that and how they kind of, maneuvered their way through this stretch instead of adding additional salary that would have taken them into the luxury tax this season. Like, it makes you feel like, why did they do that? But at the same time, they maintain, it made sense. Their plan, maintaining the flexibility that will carry them into the offseason. Kleiman has said that the team will continue to be aggressive. If you believe it, you believe it. If you don't, you don't. I'm of the mindset, I've talked to Kleiman about it. I've talked to people around the team. I've talked to people around the league. I do think that the Grizzlies will be aggressive come the offseason. And aggressive doesn't always mean that something will be done. It just means they're going to be aggressive. They're going to poke around and they're going to see what makes sense for them. So with all that being said, it was really good to see, because this is rare for Zach Kleiman to just come out, on record, other than his annual appearances during the season. We talked to him trade deadline, before the season, after the season, all that. It's very rare for Zach Kleiman to come out like this and, boldly speak the way that he did. You could tell that was like, all right, we're going too far here with the Ja trade speculation, or whatever you want to call it.
Very aggressive from Kleiman. And I do think I talked about, again, I never want to put words in Damichael's mouth because he's actually around these people a lot more than me. Although in a few weeks, I will be around these people, March 14th, March 15th. Very excited. My trip is approaching down to Memphis to hang out with Damichael and catch a couple Grizzlies games. But I do want to stress Desmond Bane's max contract isn't truly a max contract, right? Like they've structured it in a way. I could certainly see them doing the same thing with Jaren Jackson Jr.
Yep.
They have done. Zach Kleiman's no dummy. He is well aware of what is happening around the salary cap situation of the Memphis Grizzlies. And I have complete and total faith that if Robert Pera is willing to pay the tax, they will pay the tax. Second apron, I don't see anybody doing that. And I think that is where the CBA perhaps needs to be tweaked.
That's long-term suicide these days.
Absolutely. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, Damichael and I are going to break down some good news, bad news as the season resumes tonight for Memphis. Stick around for that. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature. It keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether you're backing a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, you never feel like you missed your chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the National Basketball Association. Go and check them out today. All right, Damichael, the season resumes tonight. The Memphis Grizzlies on the road, if I do recall correctly, heading out to Indiana to take on the Pacers. We'll talk more about that game here momentarily. But I do want to give some good news and some bad news regarding this Grizzlies schedule in particular as the season resumes, because a lot has been made. I think it's either the second or the fourth toughest. I'll double check it here in a moment.
It's the fourth.
Thank you. Fourth toughest strength of schedule the remainder of the way for the Memphis Grizzlies. That sounds scary, right? And I do think that is the bad news. Memphis is going to see some heavy hitters over the next 6 or so weeks. They see Cleveland a couple of times. That's one of the games in Memphis that I'll have a chance to catch, that Friday night against the Cavaliers. Maybe we need to do a live show before that or something like that.
Yeah.
We need to get back together on that, partner. Let us know in the comments. Hit us up on X if you would hang out with Damichael and I before Grizzlies Cleveland on Friday. But anyway, They have the Cavs a couple of times. Outside of OKC, it's hard to say Cleveland is not the best team in the NBA. They have to see Boston. They've got some tough games coming up. No denying that. However, the good news here, at least to me, is some of the games that they are going to be playing are against teams from the Western Conference. And Memphis has cleaned up against the Eastern Conference. Check that. Games against members of the Eastern Conference. And Memphis has cleaned up against the Eastern Conference this season. So take tonight's game, for example, against the Indiana Pacers. Indiana going into this game has a 30-23 record. But let me riddle me this, Damichael. This is speculation here, of course. We learned the definition of speculation earlier in the show. If you put the Indiana Pacers in the Western Conference, are the Indiana Pacers 30-23 in your opinion?
No. It's worse.
Okay. Yep. Absolutely. Then you have the Orlando Magic, who the Grizzlies will see on Friday night, right? And you'll be flying solo for the Friday episode, so you'll have everybody's preview for that game. Orlando is 27-29 as we rejoin the season post All-Star break. If you put Orlando at 27-29, who, fun fact, is in first place in the Southeast Division with a losing record, if you put Orlando, who is a play-in-ish team at this moment in the East, would they be in that position in the Western Conference?
Yeah, no. But I will say this. We'll talk more about them because they're tricky. They've had the injury. Sure. But that's true. As currently constructed, that record would be worse. Yeah.
So the overall point that I am making, Damichael, is while you should certainly respect your opponents, right? The Indiana Pacers have figured it out. They started really slow to the season. They've had a stretch of success these last 10 to 20 games.
Yep.
You mentioned Orlando getting a little bit healthier, having the injury issues with Banchero and others. The schedule is tough in some ways, but I think with a little bit more context in the way that the Grizzlies have played against the Eastern Conference in particular, we have to keep in mind there's 28 games left. If Memphis just goes 14-14, they go 500 over these last 28 games, they're a 50-win team, and they are solidly in the playoffs.
Yeah, Joe, I'm not looking for moral victories throughout this stretch, though. But I will say this. This is the good thing for me. I think this schedule that you just mentioned that could be potentially the bad news as we talk about the good news and bad news. Joe, I think it's the good news. I think the fact that you have the fourth toughest schedule remaining is good news. And you might be like, well, Damichael, where in the world are you going with this? But hear me out. The playoffs are approaching. How do you get ready for the playoffs? You ain't getting ready for the playoffs playing against, the Charlotte Hornets and, the Spurs, those teams. You aren't getting ready for the playoffs playing against those teams. You're going to get ready against playoffs when you got 3 games in the next 4 days against the New York Knicks. I mean, not the Knicks aren't in that stretch, but the Magic, the Pacers, the Cavaliers, and then the Knicks are in the next couple games for you at home. So that's how you get ready for the playoffs, playing playoff contenders. And not only that, playing those teams, you know what it's going to do for the Grizzlies? Because now the standings are – you see where Denver is right now? They are.
Yeah, that's another piece of bad news. They have the best player on the planet, and they are right on Memphis's heels.
They have just flew all the way up. They're right behind the Grizzlies, half a game at this point. And the thing about it is there's no margin for error. You know what that creates? That creates a sense of urgency. You know what a sense of urgency creates? It's going to be more playing time for your best players. And things have trended in that direction in the months of January and February. These are the first 2 months of the entire NBA season up to this point that Desmond Bane has played over 30 minutes per game. He's done it in January and February. Jaren Jackson Jr., same thing. Before January and February, no months of over 30 minutes per game. The last 2, over that. Same thing with Ja Morant. Before January and February, no months of over 30 minutes per game. They are trending up. Dez is probably the only one who's playing where fans and people like me and you will say, okay, we're okay with his minutes. Dez is around 34 minutes, over the last since the beginning of January. He's the one guy who's playing a lot. Jaren's going to continue to trend up. I think you get Jaren around 32, 33, that's solid. Ja's the one that's still particularly low. Ja's still roughly around 30 minutes, 31 minutes. So he's still pretty low overall, but he's playing more than he was early in the season. So I think this is clarity to me. This is not, oh, we're beating up on all the Washington Wizards and beating them by 40 points and all that. No, you got the Clippers, you got the Mavs, you got the Nuggets. You got really good basketball teams coming up here really, really soon. And you're going to have to really find out, okay, who's going to be our 9 to 10? That 12 stuff is about to go out the window. You're playing 11 and 12. You play 11 and 12 against the Nuggets because the Nuggets ain't deep at all. The Nuggets got like 8 guys, and they're going to play their dudes. And you play 12 guys against them, you might get run out of the building. So I think it's clarity. So I like this. I like the fact that you got the Pacers, and the Magic right off the jump, back-to-back, road back-to-back, and you got to travel. It's clarity because of the urgency that this sprint to the finish line. You talk about the first half and the second half of the season. I wrote about it a little bit recently. Like, they're different because the first half you played 54 games. Mm-hmm. Now it's boom, 28 games post All-Star break. It's a sprint the rest of the way. It's not, oh, let's rest some guys. And if you want that 2 seed, if you want to maintain that position against the Nuggets, you got to be ready to play each and every night.
The Memphis Grizzlies finished their regular season at home against the Dallas Mavericks on Sunday, April 13th. Why do I bring up that date? Because we are within 2 months of the regular season concluding. So that drives home to Michael's point. This is a sprint to the finish line. Hit us up on X at DamichaelC, at Joe Mullinax. How are you feeling? Good news, bad news going into the season resuming? Let us know, of course, in the comments as well. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we'll close out this Thursday edition of the show previewing Grizzlies-Pacers, a fitting title for this team, the Pacers. It's going to be an interesting offensive showdown. We'll talk about it next. Stick around. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, joined by my co-host, Damichael Cole. We are so glad to have you with us both. So glad to be back together, of course, for this episode of the show. Damichael, finally back to basketball. No more reckless speculation from random GMs about, hey, maybe Ja Morant will be available. Maybe an alien will come down from the sky and join the NBA. Maybe Luka Doncic will get traded in an inferior package and completely upset the balance of the NBA. All these things are almost certainly not going to happen, except for the last one, of course. Point being, we can finally talk about hoops again, right? And this is going to be an offensive battle. The Indiana Pacers have one of the more explosive offensive attacks in the entire NBA. Of course, so too do the Memphis Grizzlies. We talked about FanDuel earlier in the show. The current over-under line number for Grizzlies-Pacers is around 250. It's like 249.5. That would be, I believe, one of the highest, if not the highest, over-under number marks to start a game in the entire season. A lot of points potentially being scored in Indiana tonight. What do you see as the keys for the Memphis Grizzlies? We talked about the importance of a quick start post-All-Star partner earlier in the show. How do they get to that place against Indiana tonight?
Defense. Defense is going to win you this game. You're going to be able to score. You're going to be able to score. And it's not necessarily even with the points. Like you mentioned the high number. Like if you remember the score from the first game, it was 136 to 121. That was the score. And that was 257 points. So I just did that math right on the fly, Joe. I don't think that was too bad. But yeah, you had 257 points scored in the first game. So I think there'll still be a lot of points scored, but because there will be more possessions because both teams like to really get up and down. But you got to separate yourself in this game on the defensive end. We talk about the physicality side of things with the Grizzlies a lot, right? Like them, quote unquote, struggling with some of the more physical teams in the league. One, the Pacers aren't one of those more physical teams in the league. And then two, even when I think about the Grizzlies, I don't think the Grizzlies lack physicality. They might not be the most physical team, but the Grizzlies aren't soft by any stretch of the imagination to me. So this is a game where they can kind of impose their will. I think of the matchups in this game and the Grizzlies, every position that Charlotte is really good at, Memphis kind of has an answer. I mean, not Charlotte, excuse me, Indiana. I don't know why I said Charlotte. Of course they have an answer for Charlotte. But every position that Indiana is really good at, Memphis sort of has the answer. Except one where it is questionable. And that's the Miles Turner, Zach Edey dynamic. If you remember the last time the Pacers and they played against, Zach Edey, they put Miles Turner on the perimeter and they really wanted to attack that matchup. And we saw, a lot more, Brandon Clark and whatnot in that game. Is this a game where we see more Brandon Clark? Is this a game maybe Marvin Bagley's not on the injury report, Joe. Maybe, just maybe, if Zach Edey is not a fit for this game, you got another 6'10", 6'11" big who has over a 16% rebound rate right on the bench now that you got at the trade deadline.
And you are a step ahead of me because Marvin Bagley is exactly who I
knew it. I knew you were coming. This wasn't planned.
I want to stress I like Zach Edey. I want to stress that. And I want to stress in doing some research for this game, you know what the Indiana Pacers really stink at? You know what they're really not good at? Rebounding, right? Yep. That is not a strength of theirs in any way, shape, or form. They give up a lot of offensive rebounds. They don't rebound their own shots particularly well. It seems like this would be a good game for Edey to feast. But for the reasons you just mentioned, Miles Turner is a legitimate threat out there on the perimeter. You have to respect him and his range. If he can't be Edey, what the Grizzlies need, Marvin Bagley's right there. And I think that this would be a fun game to throw him to the fire because the Pacers are going to have no idea what the Grizzlies are going to do with Bagley. Right? No one's seen that. We don't really know what the Grizzlies are going to do with Bagley. It's possible he doesn't play at all, right? But I also think that Memphis has made it clear they see a window of opportunity for using him in real specific situations. And you talked earlier in the show, Damichael, about condensing the rotation, right? Yes and no. I agree that they need to figure out who their 9 or 10 are, but I do think that they need to keep utilizing their depth in terms of a game-by-game, case-by-case basis. Maybe this isn't the game for Zach Edey, but maybe this is a game where you play Vince Williams Jr. a lot more because he is such an elite rebounder as a wing and can defend multiple players on the perimeter. Maybe this isn't a game for somebody like Jalen Wells if you think that he's going to struggle with face guarding Tyrese Halliburton or whatever the case might be. But this could be a good game for a bigger wing off the bench like a G.G. Jackson, in terms of him using his size and his frame. Again, throwing the bigger combo forwards at this group or the guys like Vince Williams Jr. that are just dogs on the glass. Yeah. And you let them eat and you really not just win that advantage, but you run that score up and you get so many more possessions and you limit the possessions of the Pacers when they do miss. To me, that's the key. How do the Grizzlies take that rebounding potential advantage? And even if Edey can't be on the court, how do the other pieces on the periphery of the perimeter come down and finish these boards and finish these possessions on both ends of the court?
Yeah, and Zach Edey very well could be a difference maker.
Absolutely.
In the fact that you mentioned. Quick clarifying note, because somebody's going to point it out if I don't point it out. But yeah, in that last matchup, Zach Edey didn't play in that game. Brandon Clark started. The game that I'm referring to is the preseason game. Is the one where Miles Turner very early in that matchup was attacking Zach Edey. Made a couple 3-pointers. So it's a matchup to watch because we didn't see it in the regular season game because Brandon Clark started in that game. So you know where you talk about where Indiana will potentially try to search for mismatches because Pascal Siakam ain't a mismatch against Jaren Jackson Jr. So unless you put Jaren in foul trouble or something. But yeah, a lot of advantages on the floor for the Grizzlies in this game. I like what you said about the rotation too, Joe. That's real important because you kind of took my words in a way, but I use it as coaching for feel. And when I say shorten the rotation, I'm not saying, hey, these are the 10 guys that are listed on the chalkboard before the game.
Right.
There's 10 we're going to play without a doubt. But you know what? If this guy is clearly not working in the first half, all right, Scotty, come on. We got more minutes for you. Second half, we're just going to go with Scotty. So I think it's just having more, being more firm. How many times have you seen this season where it looks like guys have a rhythm and then Taylor yanks them out for the next batch of players or whatever the case may be. And you're like, man, he just made 2 or 3 shots. Like we've seen that a few times. So it's just being more firm with those decisions and those rotations is what I want to see. But not necessarily yet, I guess, because this is a back-to-back. That is something we need to make note of. Like I think if Ja plays 31 minutes in this game, it's okay because you got a physical Orlando team waiting on you on the second leg. But Taylor Jenkins likes to say, we don't coach, planning for that second game. You're playing to win that first game. So maybe they won't look at it like that. But look, I know Indiana has been a much better team since early in the season when the Grizzlies beat them by 15 points at FedEx Forum. Still a game the Grizzlies should win to me.
And it's important to point out this is a game in Indiana, and a couple of key Grizzlies, Desmond Bane, lots of connections to Indiana, just had his number retired at TCU there as well recently. Shout out to Des. Another homecoming of sorts for him, and of course, Jaren Jackson Jr. as well. It's always interesting, especially with Des, when he's playing somebody he thinks that he's been slighted by, or he's playing at home. I'm not going to suggest any gambling advice. That's not this kind of show, but Desmond Bane usually does pretty well for himself in games like the one coming up tonight. On our next episode of Locked On Grizzlies, it'll be a Friday edition of the show. Damichael, you'll be flying solo on that one. Possible it goes live a little bit later in the day, right? Because Damichael, of course, with the beat writer work over at the Commercial Appeal, the back-to-back, that we will have a Friday show, but it may not go live right there early on. Just giving you that wiggle room there, partner. You have a lot to talk about, though, right? The Indiana Pacers game that comes up tonight, and of course previewing a game against the Magic. You mentioned it a little bit. Two pretty different opponents. The Magic will bring a different challenge than the Pacers will.
Yeah, you're talking about one of the best scoring teams. You're talking about one of the worst scoring teams. You're talking about a mediocre defense. You're talking about a great defense. I think the Orlando kind of fits the bill when we talk about the Grizzlies struggling with those physical teams. That's a team that beat the Grizzlies early this season, and because of that physicality or whatever the case they bring to the table. So looking forward to that matchup as well. But yeah, looking forward to breaking down this game against this team, the Pacers. The Pacers, they're gonna get up and down. And I remember in the preseason when we were talking to the Grizzlies players, right after that game against the Pacers, this is when they were kind of implementing that new system and the speed. And the Pacers game was the game that showed them. It was like, they were huffing and puffing, and they were like, look, we got to get it. We got to get it together. Like this is they get up and down, and guess what? The Grizzlies get up and down. So it's going to be a fun one. And I'm looking forward to like you said, putting all this speculative stuff behind us. The trade deadline's over. You got to worry about all that. Look, Grizzlies fans, these are your guys. You either got to ride with them or you don't, because this is the group that's going to be the group that determines how far this team goes the rest of the way.
It is time to get back to basketball, which I'm very excited about. I know Damichael is as well, and I'm sure you, dear listener, dear viewer, are excited about it as well. Thank you so much for being with us on this Thursday edition of the show. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing, wherever you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube. It's all good. Make Damichael and I a part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption each and every time that an episode drops. Also, make sure that you're checking out LockedOnDaily.com. Subscribe to our free daily newsletter. We took a break on Wednesday from the newsletter, but we're back at it today. Go to LockedOnDaily.com and subscribe to our free daily newsletter right now. For Damichael, I'm Joe. Stay locked in. Enjoy Grizzlies-Pacers. Basketball is back. Can't wait to talk about it with you tomorrow here on Locked On Grizzlies. See ya.